Whenever a long day of chasing pointing dogs through Mankiller and Hippie House and Stick Farm, and our other grouse covers, leaves our gun barrels clean and our game pockets empty, my partner Keith and I don't blame our bird-finding skill, or our luck, or our dogs. Instead, we comfort ourselves with this handy explanation. The cycle must be down this year. And when the other members of our New England grouse shooting network also report slim pickings, even taking into account the Machiavellian secretiveness of partridge fanatics, we do not necessarily trust each other, we deduce a trend. If the reports are consistently grim throughout the season, we assume we know why. Grouse populations are cyclical. Always have been, always will be. Some years are better than others, and there's nothing you can do about it except wait it out. Oh, I know that tromping through the same string of covers behind mediocre bird dogs for 6 autumn weekends a year is not the most scientific method for sampling the ruffed grouse population. But we keep careful count of the birds we flush, we do not count second starts, and we do it conscientiously year after year. So do our friends. We notice patterns, and the patterns we find generally seem to match those observed by the others who hunt grouse in New England, and even in other regions. For most of my grouse hunting life, close to half a century now and counting, our number one topic of discussion and concern has been population cycles. Up or down this year? Are the peaks really getting shorter and the valleys deeper? What causes them anyway? Hypotheses abound. Weather, predators, sunspots. No partridge man would be caught dead without a theory. Of course, we have always been aware that the implacable loss of good habitat, highways and shopping malls and housing developments, sure, but more important, the maturing of the New England woodlands, is taking its steady toll. But that doesn't account for those ups and downs that keep coming regularly and predictably. The long, slow rise in grouse numbers and then the abrupt decline. In the high cycle years of the good old days, I mean 30 or 40 years ago, we'd sometimes start 25 or 30 grouse a day, and you could forgive your dog for flushing a bird wild or failing to hold a point because there would always be more birds. A lucky shotgunner might shoot a 4 grouse limit and not feel too guilty about it, and even mediocre-looking cover would hold some birds. Grouse numbers haven't been what they used to be here in New England for many decades. There's just not much good habitat left. But Keith and I have some secret places that, in good years, produce enough birds to keep us happy. In bad years, we worry whether they'll ever rebound. It's hard to accept the obvious fact that those good old days are gone forever. Even in those secret covers of ours, we'd had several lean seasons in a row, so I was feeling darkly pessimistic on opening day last October. Trying to interpret those grim numbers as a temporary valley in the cycle rather than a clear sign of the permanent demise of the ruffed grouse was beginning to seem like whistling in the dark. But as Keith and I drove through the crimson and gold New England countryside with our shotguns and bird dogs in back, he was whistling and drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. "What are you so damn chipper about?" I finally said. "Opening day, my boy," he said. "A brand new season. What could be finer?" "The prospect of scaring up a few birds would help," I said. "Oh, it's going to be good. Big partridge year. Cycles up. Mark my words." "What makes you think so?" He turned and grinned at me. "Chipmunks," he said. "Huh?" He shrugged. "I've been seeing lots of chipmunks this summer. That means it's going to be a good partridge year." I snorted. "How do you figure?" "Grouse and chipmunks. They go together. Lots of chipmunks mean lots of grouse. See?" "Not really. Acorns, son." "Of course," I grumbled. "Acorns." Nowadays, those who are seriously concerned about the health of grouse populations focus not on cycles, which are natural and therefore acceptable short-term phenomena, and which by definition include an upturn for every downturn. Nowadays, we worry about a long, slow, steady decline. Each downturn of the cycle seems to dip lower, while the ensuing upturn doesn't bounce back as high. Biologists blame it on habitat loss, suburban and industrial sprawl, and the expansion of the highway system certainly, but especially the loss of the thick understory that makes prime grouse cover as second-growth forests all over the northern tier of states mature. Habitat loss is measurable and understandable. It can also, at least in theory, be reversed. The Ruffed Grouse Society promotes selective clear-cutting as the most promising way of addressing this unhappy trend and restoring healthy grouse numbers. But regardless of the long-term scarcity or abundance of grouse, cycles will continue, and they'll continue to be mysterious. I read somewhere recently that ruffed grouse abundance in New England fluctuates on the same 4-year cycle as Atlantic salmon, UFO sightings, German pork prices, plankton yields in Lake Michigan, and cheese consumption. The article offered the cautious thesis that some of these correlations might not actually be coincidental. Nowhere else have I heard of a 4-year grouse cycle. But I am intrigued by the idea that the same forces that push up pork prices and cause people to see UFOs actually influence the reproduction and survival rates of grouse. Even more interesting is the possibility that eating cheese causes grouse to multiply. Of course, if there were a scientifically conclusive explanation, there would be no need for speculation, and much of what fascinates us about this mysterious bird would be taken from us. John Alden Knight, the creator of the solunar theory, noted that the population ups and downs of ruffed grouse correlated with cycles of solar radiation. Burton L. Spiller, known and beloved as the poet laureate of the ruffed grouse, often cited the periodic appearance of snowy owls as a surefire predictor of a sharp decline in grouse numbers. Outdoor writer Dan Holland observed that grouse numbers seemed to fluctuate the same as those of rabbits, except that grouse populations crashed a year or two after rabbits. For all I know, Keith is right. Maybe chipmunks and acorns and grouse numbers are synchronous. Still, correlation is not the same thing as causation. The cycle is not simply the rationalization of unskilled or unlucky hunters. The periodic rise and fall of grouse populations have been observed and studied for centuries. In 1721, grouse numbers had declined so dramatically in Quebec that the provincial governor outlawed shooting, and the abrupt disappearance of birds was observed in New Hampshire in 1831. New York market hunters experienced a sharp downturn in grouse numbers after the Civil War, and since that time, biologists and others have observed, studied and speculated on the phenomenon. Their research proves that grouse populations do fluctuate cyclically and regularly and predictably. In his book Ruffed Grouse, published in 1947, Knight speculated at length on the phenomenon of grouse population cycles. He noted that they occurred independent of region, quality of habitat, or weather. Cyclical crashes occurred in both England and America in 1933, and in New England and the Midwest in 1944. Knight's research showed that the cycles made one complete revolution every 8 to 14 years, 11 years on an average, although within each cycle there were fluctuations and cycles within cycles. Gordon Gullion, who devoted his life to the study of grouse and grouse habitat, put the cycle at 10 years and found, furthermore, that the population crashes came predictably on years ending in 2 or 3, 1933, 1943, 1952, L963, L973, L982. Gullion conducted his studies primarily in Minnesota, but the latter 3 of those years provided me with some pretty grim grouse hunting in New England too. The graph of a grouse population cycle does not look like the classic bell-shaped curve. Rather, it describes a long ascending slope followed by an abrupt descent. Grouse numbers increase gradually over the 10 or 11-year period, rising and falling erratically here and there until they reach their peak. Then, in the short space of a season or two, they crash and start over. But why? Well, nobody knows. Keith's chipmunk hypothesis holds that grouse flourish in years when the oaks produce a heavy acorn crop, which of course nourishes both grouse and chipmunks. But as he explains it, it's not simply that grouse like to eat acorns. Abundant acorns, in other words, do not cause grouse to flourish. Rather, it's that oak and grouse and chipmunk cycles coincide. Good mast years are good grouse years, but there have to be other unknown variables at work too. It's complicated. Those of us who love ruffed grouse pay special attention to springtime weather. A wet, cold nesting season takes a harsh toll on newly hatched chicks. Perhaps such weather conditions occur cyclically, although the research hasn't proved it. Diseases and parasites can create epidemics. Predators, of which grouse have many, can wipe out young broods. Hawks and foxes might ignore grouse and be content to hunt easy-to-catch cottontails as long as they are abundant. But when they've decimated the rabbit population, they have to turn to more challenging prey like grouse. That, at least, was how Dan Holland explained why grouse numbers plummeted a few years after those of cottontails. Several turn-of-the-century studies attempted to isolate the key variable. They postulated, among other things, poaching, market hunting, forest fires, severe winters, wet springs, dry summers, ticks, foxes, goshawks, dispersal and migration. A report from New York State, attempting to account for the crash of grouse numbers in 1906 to 07, speculated that the best bet was an unhappy combination of the cold, wet spring, the unusual abundance of predators, and an epidemic of some disease or parasite. The unlucky coincidence of several negative factors, in other words, it's doubtful that a single variable can be pinpointed as the cause of grouse cycles. Nothing in nature works in isolation. Ruffed grouse are part of an infinitely complex web of relationships. Weather, predation, disease, food, habitat, and yes, for all we know, sunspots, chipmunks, and cheese consumption are all woven together. Each factor affects all the others. Tug on one thread and the whole pattern changes. If prime habitat promotes high grouse numbers, then a heavy population of grouse will attract predators, parasites, and diseases. As these enemies feed off grouse, their numbers will grow. And when they have virtually eradicated the grouse, they, in turn, will experience a sharp downturn in their populations. This leaves the surviving grouse free to start rebuilding their numbers. It's nature's way of maintaining the vigor of the species. In times of disease, predation, or severe weather, the weak die while the fittest survive to pass their strong genes along to future generations. This is introductory Darwin, and it works for grouse and owls and germs and chipmunks. It also works for trees. Gullion discovered that during the upswings of the Midwestern grouse cycle, winter birds fed heavily on the male flower buds of aspens. These buds, Gullion surmised, provided especially nutritious and efficient forage for grouse, giving them the strength and health to evade predators, to survive harsh winters, and to procreate bountifully in the spring. Gullion also concluded that when grouse turn from aspen to other less nourishing food sources, such as hazel, birch, and ironwood, they have to spend more time and expend more energy in feeding. This, he speculated, makes them more vulnerable to predators, parasites, disease, and weather. Fewer birds survive the winter to reproduce in the spring, and newborn chicks are weaker. But why do these birds stop eating aspen buds? Gullion made an interesting discovery, which he suggested might explain the connection between what grouse eat and the fluctuations in their numbers. Trees have survival mechanisms too. When aspens are stressed by overbrowsing, which occurs when grouse are abundant, they produce a chemical that grouse and other creatures cannot digest efficiently. But when grouse numbers decrease, the aspens are no longer stressed, so they stop producing their defensive chemical, and again, in the cycle of things, grouse resume feeding on them. And so it goes. Cycles within cycles, it's nature's way. Hunters can resent it or admire it, and we can help grouse by supporting habitat improvement projects and research. But cycles will continue, and nothing will change that. Keith pulled up to the gas pumps in front of a ramshackle mom-and-pop store where two dirt roads intersected. A young guy wearing overalls and a black beard ambled out. He planted his forearms on the roof of our wagon, bent down and peered inside. He saw two men wearing leather-faced pants sitting up front, one Brittany and one English pointer whining in back, and on the floor two 20-gauge doubles, several boxes of shotgun shells, leather boots, shooting vests, check cords, belled collars, and a wicker picnic basket. He scratched his beard for a moment, processing the clues, and then grinned. "Bird hunting, eh? Well, listen, you boys want to know where you can find yourselves some partridges?" "Partridges," said Keith. "The hell with partridges. We're looking for chipmunks." Republished with permission from Cycles by William G. Tapley, 2006. The Upland Almanac, Autumn 2006. 2006 by William G. Tapley.